Most people spend their entire lives begging God for things they already possess. They pray with clenched fists, demanding, pleading, bargaining. But Joel Goldsmith discovered something revolutionary. God isn't withholding anything from you. The universe is already pouring infinite abundance into your life. The problem isn't God's unwillingness to give. The problem is your inability to receive. What if I told you that every prayer request actually pushes away what you desire? Every time you ask God for healing, you're affirming that you're sick. Every time you beg for abundance, you're declaring your poverty. This isn't how spiritual power works. Joel Goldsmith spent decades teaching a different way, the art of receptivity. Today, you'll discover the ancient secret that transforms beggars into receivers. You'll learn why asking is the language of separation, while receiving is the language of oneness. This isn't positive thinking. This is consciousness transformation. And it changes everything, though the shift takes dedicated practice over weeks and months. The secret Joel Goldsmith taught is deceptively simple. Stop asking and start acknowledging what already is. In the silence of your being, God's infinite supply is already flowing. Healing is already present. Abundance is already yours. Peace is already established. Your job isn't to create these things through desperate prayer. Your only task is to open yourself to receive what's already given. Think of a radio that's always broadcasting. The music doesn't start when you turn on your receiver. The music was always there. You simply tuned in. This is the consciousness shift that Joel called practicing the presence. When you stop asking God for things, something miraculous occurs. You begin to feel the divine flow that was blocked by your own resistance. Your asking created a wall between you and infinite supply. Your receiving opens the floodgates. But this isn't instant. It requires patient cultivation of receptive awareness. Here's what happens in your consciousness when you shift from asking to receiving. Your entire energy changes. Asking carries the vibration of lack, desperation, separation from your good. It says, I don't have this, and I need God to give it to me. This very attitude blocks the flow of divine grace into your experience. Receiving carries the vibration of fullness, gratitude, and union with God. It says, I recognize that God's infinite nature is my nature. What God has, I have. What God is, I am. This isn't arrogance. This is spiritual truth. Joel taught that Christ consciousness means recognizing your oneness with the divine source. When you receive instead of ask, you're no longer a beggar at heaven's gate. You're a child in your Father's house, recognizing that everything the Father has is already yours. This shift in consciousness from poverty to abundance thinking takes time to stabilize, but every moment of receptive awareness builds your new spiritual foundation. The practice itself is beautifully simple, though mastery requires patience. Sit quietly, and instead of presenting God with your shopping list of needs, simply say inwardly, I am now open to receive all that God is giving me. Feel yourself as an open channel. Imagine divine substance flowing into every area of your life. Health, relationships, finances, purpose. Don't force anything. Don't visualize specific outcomes. Don't manipulate. Simply be receptive, like the earth receives rain, like your lungs receive air, like a flower receives sunlight. This is natural, effortless, spiritual breathing. Joel called it resting in God. You're not making anything happen. You're allowing what already is. Practice this receptive awareness for just 10 minutes daily. Some days you'll feel nothing. Other days, you'll sense a profound peace or sudden knowing. Don't judge your progress. You're reconditioning decades of poverty consciousness. This is deep work that unfolds gradually, transforming your relationship with the divine from transaction to communion. Let me share Maria's story. She'd prayed for financial breakthrough for 3 years. Every month, same desperate prayers, same mounting debt, same anxiety. Her asking had become almost violent in its intensity. She'd shake her fists at heaven, demanding God answer her. Yet her situation only worsened, creating a cycle of spiritual frustration. Then Maria discovered Joel Goldsmith's teaching on receptivity. At first, she resisted. If I stop asking, God will forget about me, she protested. But desperation made her willing to try. For 30 days, She practiced simply receiving instead of asking. She'd sit quietly morning and evening, opening her consciousness to divine supply. The first 2 weeks felt empty, almost scary. Nothing seemed to be happening externally. But internally, something was shifting. The knot of anxiety in her chest began to loosen. A strange peace replaced her panic. By week 3, unexpected opportunities started appearing. A freelance project, a debt forgiven, a forgotten refund check. 6 months later, Maria's financial situation had completely transformed. But more importantly, her relationship with God had changed. She no longer approached the divine as a beggar, but as a beloved child receiving her inheritance. The outer abundance followed the inner shift in consciousness, proving Joel's teaching true. David's healing journey illustrates this principle powerfully. Diagnosed with a chronic condition, he'd spent 5 years in desperate healing prayers. He'd attended every prayer meeting, anointed himself with oil, declared healing scriptures. Yet his body remained sick. His asking had become aggressive, almost angry at God for not responding to his faithful petitions. A friend introduced him to Joel Goldsmith's writings on spiritual healing. The concept startled him. What if healing wasn't something God needed to send, but something already present in his true spiritual nature? What if his asking was actually the obstacle preventing him from experiencing the wholeness that was already his? David began practicing receptive awareness. Instead of begging for healing, he'd sit quietly and affirm, "I am open to receive the perfect health that is my divine inheritance." He stopped fighting his symptoms and started resting in the presence of God. This wasn't denial of his condition. It was recognition of a deeper spiritual reality. Progress came gradually over many months. Some days were harder than others. But slowly, symptoms began shifting. More importantly, fear released its grip. Within a year, medical tests confirmed what David already felt: significant improvement. His doctor called it spontaneous remission. David called it learning to receive what God had already given. Jennifer's story reveals how this principle works in relationships. She'd prayed for years for her troubled marriage to heal. Her prayers were filled with requests. "Please change my husband. Make him understand me. Fix our communication. Save this marriage." She was exhausting herself asking God to transform her circumstances and her partner. When she encountered Joel's teaching, resistance arose immediately. "If I stop asking God to fix my marriage, it will definitely fall apart." But her current approach clearly wasn't working. She decided to experiment. Instead of asking God to change her husband, she practiced receiving divine love and peace into her own consciousness. Each morning she'd sit quietly and open herself to receive God's love, not asking for anything external to change, but allowing her inner being to be filled with divine presence. The shift was subtle at first. She noticed herself responding differently to her husband. Less reactive, more peaceful, genuinely more loving without effort or pretense. Over several months, something remarkable happened. As Jennifer changed her consciousness from asking to receiving, her husband began responding differently. The relationship dynamics shifted. They weren't magically perfect, but genuine healing occurred. Jennifer learned that when you stop asking God to change others and start receiving God's nature yourself, everything around you transforms naturally. Thomas faced bankruptcy after his business collapsed. His prayers became desperate negotiations with God. "I'll serve you forever if you just save my business. I'll give more to charity. I'll be a better person. Please, God, don't let me lose everything." His asking was filled with fear, bargaining, and the exhausting energy of trying to convince God. Joel Goldsmith's teaching came to Thomas through a book someone left at a coffee shop. The title grabbed him, The Art of Spiritual Healing. Reading it, Thomas encountered a completely different approach to prayer. Instead of begging God for business success, he learned to practice receptive consciousness, opening himself to divine guidance and supply. Thomas began 20-minute daily sessions of simply receiving. "I am open to the infinite supply of God. I receive divine guidance for my next steps. I rest in the knowledge that God's abundance is my abundance." He stopped the frantic energy of asking and entered the peaceful energy of receiving. Ideas began flowing, connections appeared, opportunities manifested. 18 months later, Thomas had not only recovered but had created a more successful business aligned with his true purpose. The external success mattered less than his inner transformation. He'd learned that God wasn't withholding anything. He'd simply been too busy asking to notice what was already being given. Receptivity opened his eyes to see and his hands to grasp divine supply that had surrounded him all along. If these transformation stories inspire you to shift from asking to receiving, like this video, to help others discover Joel Goldsmith's wisdom, subscribe for more consciousness-changing teachings, and comment. Which story resonated most deeply with your own spiritual journey? Beyond basic receptive awareness, Joel Goldsmith taught several complementary practices that deepen your ability to receive from God. The first is what he called the practice of the presence. Throughout your day, pause frequently and simply acknowledge, God is present here and now. This isn't asking God to show up. It's recognizing the divine presence that's already here. You can do this while washing dishes, driving, working, waiting in line. Brief moments of acknowledging presence. God is here. The infinite is expressing right where I am. Divine intelligence is operating in this situation. These micro-practices train your consciousness to remain in receptive mode rather than slipping back into asking mode throughout your day. Another powerful technique is gratitude recognition. But not gratitude for what you want to receive. Gratitude for what's already being given that you haven't noticed. Thank you for the breath flowing into my lungs without my asking. Thank you for my heart beating without my requesting. Thank you for the intelligence running my body's systems. This shifts you from future-focused asking to present-moment receiving. You begin recognizing the millions of gifts already flowing to you every second. Your consciousness expands from scarcity to abundance awareness. You're not trying to get God to give. You're noticing what God is already giving. This awareness naturally opens you to receive more in every dimension of life. Joel also taught the power of inner listening as a receiving practice. Most prayer is talking at God. Asking, requesting, petitioning, pleading. But true prayer is listening to God. Set aside time daily for silent receptivity. Not asking for anything. Not even thinking spiritual thoughts. Simply listening with your inner being for the still, small voice. This listening isn't passive. It's alert, attentive, open. Like a musician listening for a distant melody. Like a lover listening for footsteps. You're listening for divine guidance, for the inner knowing, for the intuitive wisdom that arises when your mind becomes quiet enough to hear. This is how Joel received many of his deepest spiritual insights. In this listening receptivity, solutions to problems appear without you asking for them. Creative ideas flow without you demanding them. Peace settles without you pursuing it. You discover that God is constantly speaking, constantly giving, constantly pouring wisdom and love into your consciousness. You were just too busy asking to hear the answers already being given. Practice 15 minutes of pure listening daily. Some days you'll hear clear inner guidance. Other days will feel silent. Both are valuable. You're training yourself to be receptive rather than demanding. You're creating space for God to fill you with divine substance. Over weeks and months, this practice transforms your entire approach to spirituality from effort to grace. Another Joel Goldsmith technique for receiving is contemplative reading of spiritual truth. But not reading to gain information. Reading to open yourself to revelation. Take a single spiritual idea, perhaps from scripture or spiritual text, and contemplate it slowly. Let it sink into your consciousness. Receive its deeper meaning without asking what it means. For example, contemplate, I and the Father are one. Don't analyze it intellectually. Don't ask God to help you understand it. Simply hold it in consciousness and let its truth reveal itself to you. Receive the revelation that naturally arises when you stop asking and start opening. This is receptive meditation, or contemplate that the kingdom of God is within you. Sit with that statement. Feel into it. What does it mean for God's infinite kingdom to be within your own consciousness? Don't ask for understanding. Receive the understanding that emerges from silent contemplation. This is how spiritual wisdom becomes living experience rather than mere concept. Joel emphasized that truth reveals itself to the receptive consciousness. You don't have to beg for enlightenment. You simply have to stop blocking it with your asking. When you receive rather than demand, spiritual insight flows naturally. Practice this contemplative receiving with one spiritual statement daily. Let truth reveal itself to your open, receptive awareness. The final complementary practice is releasing treatment. In the spiritual healing work Joel taught, he emphasized that we don't treat conditions. We don't ask God to fix problems. Instead, we treat our consciousness to receive the truth of wholeness that already exists. This is subtle but revolutionary. You're not trying to change reality. You're opening yourself to perceive reality as it truly is. When facing any challenge, instead of asking God to remove it, practice this. I release this situation to divine intelligence. I open myself to receive God's perfect solution. I rest in the truth that infinite wisdom is already resolving this in ways I cannot see. This isn't passive resignation. It's active receptivity. You're acknowledging that God's intelligence is already at work in your situation. Your asking might actually interfere with divine solutions already in motion. Your receiving allows those solutions to become visible and manifest. It's the difference between pushing a river and floating with its current. Both involve water, but one exhausts you while the other carries you. Practice this releasing receiving with one challenge you're currently facing. Stop asking God to fix it. Start receiving divine wisdom about it. Notice how your relationship to the problem changes. Notice how solutions begin appearing that your asking consciousness couldn't perceive. This is the power of receiving over asking, and it transforms every area of your life gradually over time. Let's address the challenges you'll face when shifting from asking to receiving. The first and biggest obstacle is the feeling that you're doing nothing. Asking feels active, powerful, like you're taking charge. Receiving feels passive, lazy, like you're giving up. Your ego will scream, you have to ask, you have to pursue, you have to make things happen. This is where most people abandon the practice and return to desperate asking. They interpret the quiet peace of receiving as spiritual inactivity. But receiving is the most powerful spiritual action there is. It requires tremendous trust to stop asking and simply open yourself to what God is already giving. Your ego fears this surrender. When this resistance arises, and it will, remind yourself, asking is the energy of separation and lack. Receiving is the energy of oneness and abundance. The feeling of doing nothing is actually the feeling of stopping your interference with divine flow. You're not being passive, you're being receptive, which is profoundly active in the spiritual dimension. Expect this challenge especially in the first weeks. Some days you'll convince yourself that receiving isn't working and you need to return to asking. Notice this pattern without judgment. Gently return to receptive awareness. Over time, you'll experience enough results to trust the process. But the early phase requires faith even when everything in you screams to start asking again. Another major challenge is the delay between shifting consciousness and seeing results. You might practice receiving for days or weeks without any visible change in your circumstances. Your bank account still empty. Your body still sick. Your relationship still broken. The temptation becomes overwhelming to return to asking, bargaining, and pleading with God. Joel Goldsmith warned about this challenge specifically. Consciousness shift always precedes manifestation shift. Your inner transformation must stabilize before your outer world reflects it. This delay is actually a gift. It tests whether you're truly receiving or just asking in a different way. Are you receiving because you trust God or because you want results? When you face this delay, and most people do, use it to deepen your practice. This is when you discover whether you're truly learning receptivity or just using a new technique to manipulate God. True receiving continues even when nothing seems to be happening externally. It's receiving for its own sake, not for results. Many people give up right before their breakthrough. They practice receiving for 3 weeks, see no results, and return to desperate asking. Then they miss the manifestation that was about to appear. Trust that consciousness shift is happening even when circumstances haven't changed yet. The outer always follows the inner, but there's often a gap. Practice patience during this challenging phase. A third challenge is the social pressure to ask. When you tell others about your problems, they'll immediately suggest you pray and ask God for help. If you explain that you're practicing receiving instead, they might accuse you of spiritual passivity or lacking faith. You have to ask God. The Bible says, "Ask and you shall receive." This social pressure can shake your confidence in the receiving practice. You'll wonder if everyone else is right and Joel Goldsmith was wrong. You'll question whether you're being spiritually lazy. The asking paradigm is so deeply embedded in religious culture that choosing the receiving paradigm can feel lonely and heretical at times. Here's how to navigate this challenge. You don't need to convince anyone else or defend your practice. Simply do what works for your consciousness. If people want to ask, let them ask. If you've discovered that receiving opens your awareness to God's already present gifts, quietly continue your practice. Results will speak louder than explanations. You might also find it helpful to frame receiving in familiar religious language when talking to others. Instead of saying, "I don't ask God for anything," you might say, "I'm practicing resting in God's presence and trusting divine timing." This honors their paradigm while protecting your practice. Eventually, your transformation will be its own testimony to the power of receiving. The final major challenge is what Joel called taking the gift and running. This happens when receiving produces results and you immediately shift back to asking mode. You receive healing, then start asking God to heal something else. You receive financial supply, then start asking for more. You use receiving as just another way to get things from God. This defeats the entire purpose. Receiving isn't a technique to manipulate better results from God. It's a consciousness transformation from seeing yourself as separate from God to recognizing your oneness with divine source. When you receive a gift and immediately start asking for more, you're back in poverty consciousness, treating God like a vending machine. The challenge is to remain in receiving consciousness even after manifestations appear. Continue practicing receptivity not because you want more things, but because you've discovered your true spiritual identity. You're not a beggar who occasionally receives handouts. You're a child of God living in continuous flow of divine substance. This identity shift is the real goal. When results come from your receiving practice, pause and deepen your gratitude. Recognize that this manifestation is evidence of the infinite supply always available to your receptive consciousness. Don't immediately jump to the next lack. Rest in the abundance you're experiencing. Let receiving become your permanent state of consciousness, not just a temporary technique to get what asking couldn't produce. If these challenge-breaking insights resonate with your spiritual journey, like to support authentic consciousness teachings, subscribe for advanced Joel Goldsmith practices, and comment, which obstacle are you most ready to transform through the power of receptivity? Let's explore advanced applications of receiving consciousness in daily life. Start with your morning routine. Most people begin their day asking God for strength, guidance, protection, success. What if you began instead by simply receiving? I open myself to receive all that God is pouring into this day. I am receptive to divine guidance, energy, love, and wisdom. This subtle shift changes your entire day's energy. You're not approaching life from lack, needing God to give you what you don't have. You're approaching from abundance, recognizing that divine substance is already flowing. Your job is to notice it, receive it, allow it. This receptive posture attracts opportunities, insights, and connections that asking consciousness blocks. Throughout your day, practice micro moments of receiving. Before a difficult conversation, instead of asking God for the right words, receive. I am open to divine wisdom, speaking through me. Before a challenging task, instead of asking for strength, receive. I receive the infinite energy that is my true nature. Each situation becomes an opportunity to practice receptivity. Notice how this changes your relationship with daily stress. When you're asking God to help you through challenges, you're reinforcing the belief that challenges are real and powerful. When you're receiving divine presence in challenges, you're recognizing that God's infinite nature is greater than any circumstance. This shift in consciousness transforms how you experience even ordinary moments, though integration takes consistent practice. Advanced receiving practice includes what Joel called impersonal meditation. This addresses a subtle trap many spiritual seekers fall into. They stop asking God for things but start asking for spiritual experiences. They want enlightenment, mystical visions, spiritual powers. This is just asking in disguise. True receiving is impersonal, wanting nothing, including spiritual attainment. In impersonal meditation, You practice receiving without any agenda whatsoever. You're not receiving to get healing. You're not receiving to manifest abundance. You're not even receiving to become more spiritual. You're simply resting in receptive awareness for its own sake. This is the highest form of spiritual practice Joel taught. Sit in complete stillness and openness. No goals, no desires, no spiritual ambitions. Just pure receptivity to whatever is. This might feel empty at first. Your mind will panic. What's the point if I'm not getting anything? But this is precisely the point. You're learning to receive God's being rather than God's gifts. You're experiencing union rather than transaction. This impersonal receiving gradually transforms your entire consciousness. You stop approaching spirituality as a means to an end and start experiencing it as an end in itself. God becomes not a resource to tap, but a presence to dwell in. This is the ultimate shift from asking to receiving, and it changes everything about how you live, though few people reach this level quickly. Another advanced practice is receiving on behalf of others without them knowing. Someone shares a problem with you. The automatic response is to promise you'll pray and ask God to help them. But what if you instead practice receiving divine truth for them? Silently, you open your consciousness to receive the truth of their spiritual wholeness, abundance, and divine protection. You're not asking God to fix them. You're receiving the truth of what they already are in divine consciousness. This is how Joel practiced spiritual healing. He didn't petition God to heal sick people. He opened his consciousness to receive the truth that sickness has no reality in spiritual consciousness. Only wholeness exists in God, therefore only wholeness truly exists. This practice is subtle and powerful. You might be in conversation with someone describing their problems. Internally, you're not agreeing with their problem consciousness. You're silently receiving divine truth. I receive the truth of this person's infinite nature. I am open to the recognition of their perfect spiritual wholeness. You don't argue with them. You hold receptive space for truth. Over time, you'll notice that people in your presence often experience shifts without you saying anything spiritual. Your receptive consciousness creates a space where they can receive their own healing, guidance, or breakthrough. This is advanced spiritual practice. You're not trying to change anyone. You're simply receiving truth so clearly that it dissolves false appearances in the consciousness of those around you. The most advanced application of receiving consciousness is what Joel called living the illumined life. This is when receiving becomes so natural that you no longer distinguish between spiritual practice and daily living. Your entire existence becomes one continuous flow of receiving divine presence, guidance, and substance. You're not practicing meditation. You are meditation. In this state, challenges still arise, but you meet them from receiving consciousness automatically. Financial pressure appears, and without thinking, you're already open to receive divine supply. Health issues emerge, and your consciousness is already receptive to spiritual wholeness. Relationship conflicts occur, and you're already receiving divine love and wisdom. This isn't perfection. Joel himself said there were days of doubt and fear, but the foundation is different. Your default setting is receiving rather than asking. When you slip into asking mode, you notice it quickly and gently return to receptivity. The consciousness of poverty and separation no longer dominates your spiritual life. Abundance and oneness are your natural state. Reaching this level takes years of dedicated practice for most people. Don't be discouraged by that timeline. Every day of practicing receiving moves you closer to this illumined life. Every moment you choose receptivity over asking rewires your consciousness. You're not trying to achieve some future state. You're opening to what's already present. That's the beauty of receiving. The gift is already given. You're simply learning to notice. Let's talk about what happens when receiving consciousness becomes your permanent state. First, your relationship with God fundamentally transforms. God is no longer a cosmic parent you petition for favors. God becomes the infinite presence you dwell in, the divine consciousness you share, the eternal source you recognize as your own being. This doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you humble in a completely different way. You're not special because God gives you things. You're ordinary because what God is, everyone is. The only difference is consciousness. Some people know they're already receiving. Others are still trapped in asking. Your job is to know, and eventually to help others discover what you found. Prayer becomes completely different. You no longer approach prayer as negotiation or petition. Prayer becomes awareness, recognition, acknowledgement of what already is. God is present. Infinite love is here. Divine wisdom is operating. Perfect supply is flowing. You're not trying to make these things true. You're recognizing they're already true and opening yourself to receive them. This consciousness shift affects every relationship in your life. You stop asking people to complete you and start receiving the love you already are. You stop demanding circumstances change and start receiving the peace that exists beneath circumstances. You stop pursuing happiness externally and start receiving the joy that is your spiritual nature. Life becomes receiving rather than achieving. When you live in receiving consciousness, you notice that things come to you rather than you chasing them. Opportunities appear without your seeking. Solutions arise without your struggle. Resources flow without your manipulation. This isn't magic. This is the natural result of aligning your consciousness with the divine flow that's always been present but was blocked by your asking. Your decision-making transforms. Instead of asking God to show you which path to take, you quiet yourself and receive divine guidance. An inner knowing arises, a subtle sense of rightness, a peaceful clarity. You don't force decisions through analysis and anxiety. You receive them from the infinite intelligence operating in your consciousness. Your creative expression flourishes. Artists, writers, entrepreneurs, and creators understand this. The best work comes not from striving, but from receiving. When you're in receptive consciousness, ideas flow. Inspiration strikes. Solutions appear fully formed. You're not creating from personal effort. You're receiving what's already complete in divine mind. Even your body responds differently. Stress decreases because you're not constantly in the asking energy of pursuit and lack. Your nervous system relaxes into the receiving energy of trust and abundance. Many physical symptoms that were rooted in consciousness of separation and fear begin to dissolve naturally as you rest in receptive oneness with divine source. This is gradual but genuine transformation. Living from receiving consciousness doesn't mean you never take action. Joel emphasized that receptivity leads to inspired action, which is completely different from desperate action. When you receive divine guidance, you act from inner direction rather than outer pressure. Your actions become effortless, flowing, aligned with the universe rather than fighting against it. You also discover that receiving consciousness naturally makes you generous. When you know you're living in infinite divine supply, sharing becomes natural. You're not asking God to give you more so you can hoard it. You're receiving constant flow, so giving is simply allowing that flow to move through you to others. This generosity isn't sacrifice, it's recognition of the endless supply. Your presence becomes healing to others. People are drawn to you without understanding why. They feel peaceful in your company. Problems seem less overwhelming when they're around you. This isn't your personal power. It's the divine presence flowing through your receiving consciousness. You've become a clear channel for God's love, wisdom, and healing energy. Challenges still arise in this consciousness, but you meet them differently. Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What is trying to emerge through this situation?" You receive challenges as invitations to deepen receptivity rather than evidence that God has abandoned you. This shift in perspective changes your entire experience of life's difficulties. The ultimate truth Joel Goldsmith revealed is this: you are not separate from God, trying to receive gifts from an external source. You are the very consciousness of God, receiving awareness of your own infinite nature. When you practice receiving, you're not getting something new. You're removing the veil that blocked your recognition of what has always been yours. This is why asking never worked. You were asking yourself to give yourself what you already had. You were demanding that God provide what God has never stopped providing. The problem was never God's unwillingness to give. The problem was your inability to receive because your consciousness was focused on lack rather than abundance, on separation rather than oneness. Now you understand why Joel emphasized stopping asking and starting receiving. Every moment you spend in receptive awareness, you're practicing the truth of your being. You're not becoming spiritual. You're recognizing the spirituality you've always been. You're not acquiring divine nature. You're receiving awareness of the divine nature that is your eternal reality. This is your new life, a life of continuous receiving. Not receiving things, though things will come. Receiving the presence of God as your own consciousness. Receiving the infinite abundance of the universe as your natural inheritance. Receiving the love, wisdom, peace, and power that have always been yours. Stop asking. Start receiving. Everything changes when you do. If your understanding of prayer and spirituality has been forever transformed by Joel Goldsmith's teaching on receiving consciousness, like this video to spread this life-changing wisdom, subscribe for more advanced spiritual teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to declare your shift from asking to receiving consciousness.